lakho mnganwa ilungelo lakho mnganwa lakho mnganwa ilungelo lakho mnganwa lakho mnganwa ilungelo lakho mnganwa timpolompo awungela wemnganwa.
Awusanibona babukeli sesifikile thina nohlelo Yilungelo Lakho. It's your right. Senelethela lona bukhoma la kumahamba phambili pheli SABC 1 ngisho umzansi for sure. Hope you all had a great Easter holidays. Mina ke ngingumajali uAlisha igama. Khumbula phela mbukeli ukuthi asinivaleli neze ngaphandle kulolu hlelo nani phela ngabamba iqhaza. Endabeni yethu yanamhlanje ngokuthi nje nisishale ucingo inamba zethu akakashintshi zithi 011 714 6918 uzame ku 011 714 6919. You can also email us your thoughts to consumer@sabc.co.za or catch us on Facebook or alternatively follow us on Twitter. Mina ke ngingu @Alisha Jali #Yilungelo Lakho. Sawubona mbukeli. Indaba yethu yanamhlanje mbukeli, many consumers are sinking in debt despite all manner of steps taken to pull them out. Now this alarming situation has prompted authorities to not only talk but also act tougher against reckless credit extension. From now on, many overborrowing consumers will not find it easy to choke themselves to financial ruin with unaffordable debts. Akesibheke nankumbiko.
Uzifumana usengxakini efuna imali ngokukhawuleza. Impela nyanga ibonakala isekude kwaye akunakulinda unye usuku. Sukuba nexhala uncedo lukhona. Kuba indawo ezibolekisa ngemali zithe phansi kwindawo zonke. Maxa wambi wenza isicelo ungekudala uyifumane imali leyo ungakhange uphume nasendlini. Kubantu abaninzi nabasokola ukuba bengenamali, lamatyala afumaneka lula enza uninzi luntyumpa-ntyumpeke ematyaleni. Ngoku urhulumente kunye namanye amaziko uthatha amanyathelo amaninzi ukunqanda esi simo singafuni kulawuleka. Kulo nyaka uphelileyo urhulumente wazisa ithuba lokuba abanamatyala bazihlangule babe nesiqalo esitsha kwiincwadi ze-credit bureaus, nto ebibizwa i-credit amnesty. Bambi balisebenzisa eli thuba ukulungisa isimo sabo kwii-credit bureaus, ngelixa abanye babuyela emva baphindela ematyaleni. Phofu zingaqali ukuvela ezi ziphumo nangaphambili babakhona abagaxeleka ematyaleni emva kwe-credit amnesty. Ngoku urhulumente uvala izikroba. Umcebisi we-National Credit Regulator uPeter Ngwane uthi le meko ibangela ukuba bafune ukuba kanye uphi unobangela.
Prior to the amendment of the Act, credit providers were actually given a latitude to develop their own assessment mechanism regarding affordability. But what we've noted is that there is a serious discrepancies in terms of how they actually conduct those affordability assessment. First and foremost, credit providers were not verifying the income of the consumers, and secondly, the debt obligations that are appearing on the bureau. They were also not verifying those particular debt obligations that are actually appearing on the bureau. And again, there was a low declaration in terms of the minimum living expenses by the consumers, because you remember that the consumers, they've also have an obligation to disclose during affordability when it's conducted how much they're actually spending on their living expenses.
Uthi injongo ukuhlisa izinga lokuntyumpa-ntyumpeka ematyaleni, kodwa tshintsho olunjani oluza kuziswa yile miqathango mitsha.
This will actually help a lot in terms of restricting a supply of credit to consumers who are already over-indebted, and furthermore, it will also help consumers who are over-indebted not to access credit. And again, it will also give a full exposure to credit providers in terms of the affordability of the consumer, because now, in terms of the amendment, the credit providers are obliged to request a bank statement, a pay slip. They must also pull the information from all the bureaus so that they can determine the existing financial obligations of the consumers.
Nemiqathango mitsha seyiqalile ukusebenza. Ithemba lokuba iyakuphelisa le ngxaki yokubolekisa imali kubantu abangenamandla ukuyibuyisa. Kuvuyisela Mdoda, Yilungelo Lakho, eGauteng.
Siyabonga kakhulu ngalo mbiko esiwudidiyelwe nguvuyisile Mdoda phela ukukhuluma kabanzi ngoshintsho lemithetho yokubolekisa phela kwezimali phecelezi amendments kwi-National Credit Act. Masamukele izivakashi zethu sinayo Miss Rihanna Stein yena ophuma kwihhovisi lomxazululi wezinkinga zezikweletu nokubolekiswa kwezimali phela i-Credit Ombudsman. Siphinde sibe nayo uBoots Phamandla Kumkani yena ke uphuma kumkhakha wamabhizinisi Department of Trade and Industry. And from our Pretoria studios, we welcome Mr. Henny Ferreira, Omele in Microfinance South Africa. Henny, a very good afternoon to you. Thank you so much for joining us here on Yilungelo Lakho, sir.
Thank you and good afternoon.
All right, let's come back to Studio Boots Sanbonani. Good afternoon, Rihanna.
Good afternoon.
Sawubona.
Boots, let's start with you. I-DTI ibi introduce i-credit amnesty ukuthi izame ukusiza ama-consumers are rehabilitate their financial profile. How has this worked out?
Manibulele ngelithuba usinike lona isebenze kakhulu kulonyaka uphelele we started with the process of removing adverse credit information from the credit bureaus. It started in March 2014, end of March 2014 to end of May 2014. I-program ibihamba ngalendlela ukuthi abantu abane adverse credit listing abo babengababhadala amatyala wabo nabo bebe behind ekubhadela namatyala I mean i-arrears. So into bebeyenza bethi kana bewabhadela amatyala la period ba approach i-credit bureaus kwenzela if bawabhadela amatyala then azaw remove kwi-credit bureau. Abanye bebe ngazazi noba banamatyala emboleko kuma credit bureaus, so it's sizileke lokho. And then secondly kunababe nama judgment others paid up judgment before the amendment. Paid up judgment bezihlala lapha credit bureaus for 5 years. And then for wena ukuthi ususe lapha bekufanele uye egqwetheni igqwetha then liye enkundleni enkantolo emveni koko li dibane nomanki umanki akususe then
it was a long process.
It was a long process and also it be expensive ama consumers bekufanele abhadale imali. So siyasathi ke ngokufakala lo mthetho we removal of adverse credit information bayibiza ngoba in amnesty ke nangona i-amnesty ayo amnesty ethi abantu mabangawabhadala amatyala ithi fanele bawabhadala kodwa ndifuna ukuyibeka into ukuthi emveni koba senze lonto many consumers abathengi baye basuswa kwi-credit bureaus because abanye bebengazazi noba bane judgments and baye bosuswa because umthetho uthi credit bureaus mabasuse lo matyala within 7 days. Kwinsuku ezi7 after befumene information or ulwazi lokuthi ityala libhatelwe laqhitshwa. Then umuntu funeka bekanti uyasuswa kwi-credit bureau. So isebenzele kakhulu ngoba we had quite a number of consumers who were actually in a negative state
and couldn't acquire credit.
And they could not acquire credit. They could not even participate in the economy. To the extent that over 22 million of active consumers, we had around about plus minus 10 who had negative information. Abanye bengazi, abanye because they cannot afford. You know, so yelonto ke government uye decide ukuntoba aze ne amendment yalomthetho kwakunye ne regulations ukuthi izaw implementwa njani. Yes.
No.
Yeah. I-report sezawuphuma in terms of isebenzele kanjani but roughly ningatsho over 5 million consumers were removed during that process. You know, because now akufanele uhambe enkundleni uyobhadala imali because we don't want consumers to when we have paid your debt you still have to pay money to go to a court and remove your judgment. So that's the positive things that came out of the amnesty.
Let's also find out what came out of that amnesty, if it was all positive. Rihanna, I mean, maybe a lot of people misunderstood what credit amnesty was. They thought that their debt was being totally written off. But is this what really caused some of the backlogs at the Credit Ombuds office?
Yes and no. I think at the time we saw a huge increase in number of calls from consumers saying what can they do. They also want to take benefit from this amnesty because I think they are so desperate that when they hear the word amnesty, they thought that this new regulation is going to make their debts go away and disappear. And unfortunately, we had to tell those people, no, there's going to be information removed from the credit bureau, not your name. Your name will stay there with your accounts, but the negative information will be removed. So you will still be on the credit bureau. You, the Mr. Consumer who had accounts in the past, your name will still be there. But those negative connotations like written off debt and handed over to attorneys, those things, that was wiped off to try and help the consumers, re-enter the market. But yes, I do think there are a lot of consumers who benefited, but, the warning is, of course, that if after the amnesty, and I know we shouldn't call it that, but for ease of reference,
name, really.
that's what the consumers know. After that period, if you then still have an account and you skip payments and you don't pay, of course that same information that you were, in default will be sent back to the bureau. So, it was a once-off removal, and after that, there's a process in place again. So consumers mustn't think for 1 minute that if they now default, their name won't appear on the bureau as a person who defaulted.
Rihanna, if you can actually explain, you've got a letter in front of you. It's from a consumer who's got all his credit checks. And please tell us basically what that profile means, because he's very confused. He can't seem to get access to any credit.
Yes. This consumer, from this profile that you've handed me, he was a very good consumer. He managed to pay off all his accounts, but he had 28 accounts. So in the past, for whatever reason, he entered into a number of loans. Not all of them big loans. They were small. Some of them, it's 4,000 and 2,000. So they weren't big loans, 2,300. But he managed to pay off all those accounts. And that information is appearing on the bureau. So it's all updated. Nothing is outstanding. And it shows.
But why can't he get credit?
Well, I think that they do look at his history, because history is still there. And the history shows that on most of these accounts, or some of them, he was in arrears for 150 days plus that he didn't pay those accounts. Maybe he had some employment issues. Some consumers, they lose their jobs, and then when they get employment, they start paying off the accounts. And at this point, I think there can be one of two reasons. Either the person who's looking at his credit profile is very conservative and very risk averse, because some credit providers can make a decision for themselves. The Act does say that they can decide who they want to give credit to. So if they have a criteria that they don't want to give credit to a person who had a certain profile, then that's their decision. He must just go to somebody else.
They're right.
The second one is they will always look at his affordability. That's what the Act requires them to do. And if they do that correctly, that may be where he's falling down. We don't know. Okay. But he can ask for the reasons. He should ask for the reasons in writing. And then they must tell him, we don't want to give you credit because you can't afford it, according to us. Or we don't want to give you credit because of your past history. And then we can look at it and say, well, they're right or they're wrong.
All right. So he should do the asking, basically, for a written response. Let's go to Pretoria quickly. Mr. Henny, please tell us a bit about microfinance, sir.
Microfinance South Africa is an association. We've been in existence for 20 years. Our members are all registered with the National Credit Regulator. We have a code of conduct. And my members supply credit in what we would generally call the unsecured market or the short-term market. And all of that credit needs to happen within the context of the law.
All right. Does that include omashonisa, Mr. Henny?
That is exactly a problem, and I'm so glad you've got Peter from the DTI there. The machinistas are not regulated. We have approached the Portfolio Committee, we have approached the NCR, we have approached the DTI numerous times. We are now living on a promise that they will bring the machinistas into the fold. Regardless of that, even today, if you are not registered with the NCR, you need to comply with the legislation. And if you are small, i.e. you have less than 100 loans, or your book is smaller than 500,000 rand, you still need to comply. That threshold, we believe, is about to be changed. And we believe that would be a step forward, and we really wish that the DTI on that one will take the initiative and run with the ball.
Thank you so
As
much.
we speak right now, part of the problem in the market is those people who are regulated and those who do things by the book. And we often have to turn a consumer down for reasons such as been discussed by both Rihanna and Peter. They, in fact, then go to the underground market. They go to the machonistas. That consumer enjoys no protection in any way whatsoever. He has no recourse. And, in fact, it impacts on the legal market very, very negatively. More important, it impacts on the consumer extremely negatively. And the figures and the results that we're talking about is just not seen anywhere.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ferreira, raising some very important issues there, because the issue seems to be the unregistered lenders, because you can't get recourse when you go there. Please join us shortly after this. Hello and welcome back. Ngibukele khumbula phela ukuthi nawe ungabamba iqhaza kwingxoxo yethu ngokuthi ushayele ucingo la e-studio ku 011 noma 7146919. Ungasithumela i-email ku consumer@sabc.co.za noma usithole ku Facebook or tweet me directly at Alisha Jali #Yilungelo Lakho. But Spa, awuchaze indaba yomashonisa ngempela. People want to know ukuthi ibona labantu abagcina bengasakhoni ukuthi basizwe umthetho uma phela mase beboleke kubona.
Okay, thank you. Ngos, I think for the benefit of any, in respect of the loan sharks, I think I must put it on record that the National Credit Amendment Act and the regulations, they are in force, and we published them on the 13th of March, 2015. That means whoever who is actually in the business of being a machonisa or a loan shark, what we as DTI in the process of doing, together with the National Credit Regulator, the Minister will prescribe a threshold in terms of who should be registered as a credit provider. Currently, or before the Act came into being, you needed to have 100 credit agreements and at a value of over 500,000 per year.
Okay.
But now,
ngizama
ukuthi ma ufuna ukubolekisa ngemali, phambi kokuba ubhaliswe ne-National Credit Regulator, bekufanele ube kanti ezincwadini zakho unabantu ababoleka imali lethe abawu 10. I-value yaloko bekufanele ukuthi ibe around about 500,000 ngonyaka. But manje the law has changed. If ubolekisa ngemali, uhulumende uzobeka a prescribed threshold. We call it a threshold, where a minister will actually publish a notice in the government gazette, indicating that from, by way of example, from 100 rand in terms of value of a credit agreement to a particular amount, you are supposed to be registered with the National Credit Regulator. But I must stress it that our conditions of registration will differ. A huge bank in terms of registration, or a medium-sized bank, or a machonisa who's doing a loan sharking on the street are not going to be the same. The conditions for registration are going to differ. But we want everybody to be registered. We want to know everywhere they are. But that mandate is within the National Credit Regulator. They will actually enforce that particular. But I can actually give...
Noma bebolekisa ngo 50 rand bazokhona ukuthi ba register manje.
Bazakhona ukuthi ba register.
They'll be enforced to register.
Ngoba ungabolekisa ngo 50 rand about 1,000.
Yebo.
You understand? So lokho kuhamba beyond 100 rand maybe esibeka as a threshold. So minister in the next coming weeks or so uzokhipha another isaziso futhi esishoyo ukuthi ngoba that's what is required in terms of the act ukuthi from now onwards if ubolekisa ngemali you must be registered. Okungadifa ukuthi ama conditions anjani for wena to register, because over indebtedness or ukutyubeka ematyaleni kwenziwa ntoba kunabantu esingabazi into baboleka imali phi ezikoneni. So sizama ukuvala loo nto, and NCR since the 13th of March now saying ama powers ukuthi ihambe inokhe inqonqoze door to door, you know, kulabo bantu babolekisa ngemali, and they must be registered with the NCR.
All right.
Yeah, and then coming to the issue of the consumer who paid up his
debts,
debt, I think it should be it might be an issue of affordability, because as government and position here to E1, if you have paid up your judgments and if you have paid up your arrears, and then you can afford, because the simo semali siyachinja. Yesterday or izolo ungazithola ukuthi hayi awukwazi ukubhadala, ufumana ijob entsha uyakwazi ukubhadala. So we don't want those consumers to be closed, balahlele eceleni, because they can afford. What matters is the affordability, you know. And if a consumer is unhappy with the outcomes or is poor, say assessment, kala fanele lodge complaint with the credit provider. Lo mhlambe masithi uyekwa Edgar's,
okay,
as an example.
Is this kula new amendments?
Yes, yeah, kula new amendments. Fanele uhambe uyekwa Edgar's and then ubatshela ukuthi ufuna ukulodge i-complaints.
Ukuthi abakunikeza
babone ukuthi and bakunikeza i-reasons. Izizathu why bengakunikeza i-credit.
Okay.
Yeah, within a period of 14 days. If it's not resolved, then they can approach the National Credit Regulator, of which the National Credit Regulator must actually try and resolve the issue within 7 days.
Okay.
So that is the procedure in terms of the new amendments, which actually kicked in on the 13th of March, 2015.
You know what, ngifuna ukuthi kusisi Rihanna, what is, as it stands, how is the affordability assessment done currently that really needed a change as to what the new amendment's going to entail now?
What we've seen, just from the complaints that we've seen at our office, is that when we ask for a copy of the affordability assessment form, you know, it's often a one-page document where they've put down the, you know, the consumer's income and his expenses, and then they work out, can he now afford the new loan? But what happens is that the consumer puts a very low amount for living expenses, because of course he wants the loan. If he put his real living expenses on there, then, you know, it will be a negative sum. So what they do, and we've seen hundreds of examples, they put their 100 rand for monthly total living expenses. And okay, sometimes it's 300 or 500 rand, but even whether it's 500 rand, it's still totally unrealistic. I mean, which family can live on that? So that is what they did in order to make it look like they can afford the loan, because they want the loan. And that, of course, then gets them into a debt problem. They can't service this debt. They can't afford it. And, you know, then the trouble starts. They can't pay back this loan, then they go and take another loan, or it's handed over to debt collectors. And then, of course, as you know, we've discussed this before, then it increases, it doubles, there's costs, there's legal costs. And they don't realize the trouble that they're going to get themselves into by you know, understating their living expenses. So in the past, the credit providers, they had to ask for income and expenses, but they often just relied on the consumer's word for it. They didn't check it. And then if the consumer said, my expenses per month in total is 500 rand, that's what they wrote down, and that's what they worked on. And that didn't work, because we saw too many consumers being over-indebted, and they cannot afford the loans. And the new regulations, it's, you know, there's definitely a huge drive to try and tighten that up. And I think we'll get to the example of what they're going to do in future now. And that's from the 13th of March. The new regulations are already effective. So it's going to be difficult, even if you walk into a store today.
I'm sure some
it's going to be more difficult.
Have actually experienced that. Let's go back to Henny. Henny, reports indicate that sometimes both consumers and the creditors could cheat the actual system to get approval. What is your stance on that?
We're touching on a host of issues which we need to work into dealing with this problem. First of all, reckless lending as such is extremely difficult to define, because people live in different circumstances and have different environments. We, I believe, made progress in that we now also acknowledge that there is something such as reckless borrowing. And I think that starts to speak to the heart of the problem. Rihanna made it very clear that the consumer who declares that I can live on 500 rand is probably being dishonest. The reason why he or she is being dishonest, we don't understand. And the consequence is manifold. First of all, as she explained, the consumer will be held liable The principle in this country is if you make debt and that debt was legal, you will repay. From the side of the credit provider, somebody who doesn't repay is also bad news. And in this market, where you have huge institutions, smaller institutions, and the underground market competing, if you don't set your regulations properly and you don't do a full market assessment and a full market impact assessment, consumers who deserve credit and don't get it will start making a plan to get it. They will either be dishonest or they will go into the underground market.
Let's leave it there
And
for
in the
now,
same
Henny. Let's leave it there for now. So we're going to continue with this discussion shortly after this break. Mbukeli masibambe lapho futhi sithi shwi ngaseyitolo. Please don't go away. Asiphinde sikwamukele futhi mbukeli. Remember, you can be part of this discussion by calling us on the following numbers. It's +27 or 011-714-6918 or 714-6919. Ungasithinta futhi kwi-email ku consumer@sabc.co.za noma usithole ku Facebook or tweet me directly. Ngiwabhekile ama-tweets eni khona manje @AlishaJali #Yilungelo Lakho. Henny, please go ahead and finish that very important point, sir.
So let us move to the current situation, which now effectively started on the 13th of March this year. The consumer approaches the credit provider. There are certain obligations on the credit provider to determine what that particular person can afford. It's quite widely described. It allows for some exceptions. We don't believe it's been done perfectly, but it's there. Very important, and Rihanna did allude to it. The consumer also needs to be honest. And it actually is required, where it says the consumer must accurately disclose to the credit provider all financial obligations to enable the credit provider to conduct an affordability assessment. And I think, Alicia, this is a crucial part of the discussion. We need credit providers who are well overseen by the NCR, who report accurately, who build a reputation that they are really providing good and honourable services. They are the better alternative to the underground and the loan sharking market, because to regulate this market is going to be a massive task. And at the same time, consumers must also understand that if they are honest, the chances of them getting into trouble and being over-indebted is reduced. Then at the same time, if the consumer can afford this credit, and he or she serves that credit well, so a person takes a loan for 10,000 Rand over 24 months, the loan is legal in every possible way, the guy pays it back, his credit record, in fact, will be impacted in a positive way. But, and I think this is an important part, life happens.
Yes.
Something goes wrong, or you spend a little bit of money recklessly, and all of a sudden you can't afford to pay a particular installment. The worst thing you can do at that point in time is to keep quiet and hope it's going to go away. Because it will not. It will eventually be recalled to you and you will be required to repay. So the moment you run into trouble, the same honesty principle should come out again. You go to the credit provider, you tell him what's happened, you explain your dilemma, and I can say to you that in 99% of the cases, the problem will be managed. And then we start talking about good credit. Let's take the honesty discussion one step further. And we assume and we accept that there must be honesty on the side of the credit provider. He must play by the rules. In the same way, when a consumer takes up credit, he must also be honest in terms of what can I afford, what do I need it for, and what is the right product to take up for this particular situation. One of the prevalent behaviors we see is a consumer walk into our offices, he says, what can I afford? Meaning, what will you extend me? Well, the question should really be, how much do I need to do what? And then start the engagement and the negotiation with the credit provider. Because keep in mind, if the right product is sold, both the credit provider and the consumer will win in the long term.
Thank you, Henny. Let's leave it there for now. I really want to discuss what if consumers feel that these amendments will even sink them further into debt because they can't get credit in the legal manner. As Henny has just pointed out, we can't expect people to be honest, you know, like we expect them to be. All right, before you answer there, let me take a caller on the line. Sisi, a very good afternoon to you, sir. Yilungelo Lakho, please go ahead. Usitshele igama lakho bese usibuza umbuzo nombeka umbono.
Sanibonani.
Hello, Sisi, kunjani?
Ngikhona njani?
Siyaphila ma, sicela uqhubeke ngombuzo noma umbono.
Umbuzo. Okusho ukuthi ngicela nje loncedo futhi kakhulu.
Yebo sis.
Okusho ukuthi ngaboleka imali. Ngangisasebenza. Ngathi nangiboleka imali. Ngayithola uqala. Ngabuyela futhi ngingakaqedi isikoloto sami Nkosi yami banginikeza futhi enye. Kanti kuzokwenzeka ngiphelelwe umsebenzi. Nase ngiphelelwe umsebenzi. Ngaza ukubhadala inyanga lezi ebengisathola imali zabo ma UIF ngizama ukuthi ngibhadale. Otholakala ukuthi nemali engiyitholayo ayikho kahle. Incane kunabantwana izinto ziningi ezenzakalayo ekhaya. So ke ngase ngiyabuza ukuthi ngahamba futhi ngaya khona ngahamba nezincwadi zami emsebenzini njengoba babesinikezile icase yephingaka lemsebenzini. Ngahamba nezinto zami zonke ngazikhona lapho eAfrican Bank. Angisho nje ukuthi ngazise African Bank. And then nangifike African Bank bathi okay umuntu oqoshiwe emsebenzini ngoba emsebenzini ngaqoshwa kwaba idismissal. Bathi emsebenzini okusho African Bank bathi okusho ukuthi njengoba ngiqoshiwe i-insurance ayingibekeli izinto zami konke ayingenzeli lutho.
Okay ma, so sikusize kanjani ma?
Okusho ukuthi ke manje kwasekenzeka ukuthi umyeni wami wathola isikorobho naye wasebenza. Wathi njengoba bengifonela njalo nami ngibe ne-stress. Ukuthi umyeni wami since aqala 2008 engibhadalela amalokhungana bathi angikhiphe noma yi-200 rand kulama account wami oyi-2. So umyeni wami ungibhadalela lama 200 rand every month.
Sisimakhosazana, ngicela uchaze ma usheshe sishiwa isikhathi, ngicela usichazele ukuthi ufuna sikusize kanjani ma. Siyayizwa indaba yakho but manje yiphi inkinga yakho mayelana le kumele sikubhekele nayo?
Inkinga yami bengicela nje ukuthi ngeke mhlawumbe nangisigwerabhela yonke lento lena ngoba nomyeni wami naye akusemnandi. Uyakhala uthi khona manje uyabhadala ama 200 rand mara akubonakala ukuthi isikweto siyathi isikweto asehli asenzi lutho manje naye uyakhala Nkosi yami angisazi ukuthi ngenze njani.
Oh, okay ke mama Khosazana, emva kwekhefu nje please uhlale lapho ubuka umabona kude wakho sizobona ukuthi bazothini ivakashi zami ngendlela abangakusiza ngambukeli. Let's now take another quick commercial break, please ungayindawo. Welcome back Mbukeli. Remember, for your contributions the number to call is 011-714-6918 or 714-6919. Ungasithumela ni email ku consumer@sabc.co.za or visit our Facebook page and tick like there or tweet us and tweet me directly. I'm looking at your tweets at Alisha Jali #Yilungelo Lakho. But singamsiza kanjani noma what's the best advice ongamsiza ngayo? Nanguthi bayazama. She's an active consumer at least. Wathatha case yakhe sebona ukuthi kuyabheda wa approach credit.
Yeah, ndiyacabanga ukuthi eyona solution yokuqala ku-approach i-creditor and explain anikeze ingcaciso ngesimo semali sakhe. After that fanele ahlangane no husband. Fanele ahlangane no husband wakhe benze agreement. If for example they are married in community of property. If they are married in community of property, then the husband is willing to take over the responsibilities. Then yena fanele approach the creditor. And then benze arrangement. Then about debt rearrangement.
Okay.
Mangenza umzekelo, if ebekhokha 300 rand for isikoloto. If ebekhokha 100 rand for isikoloto, then unokuhlangana ne-credit provider negotiate ukuthi akhokhe 150 or noma 100 rand until abe kube kanti isimo sakhe semali siya improve sibe ngcono. That's the only solution that I can give, but a credit provider does not have a right to just terminate and actually enze okungafanelanga akwenze ngoba fanele ba negotiate bakhulume asho naye nokuthi ke kubalekile lapha bhatela khona isikoloto fanele afune I balance statement of balance ukuthi ngi-owe malini imali nefanele ngibhatele nokuthi mhlambi if they owe 100,000 over 3 years athi ngicela bayihlehlise ngibhatale over 5 years kusho ukuthi installment izohla ibhekezansi, you know. So iloko nje advisor.
Okay, Rihanna, do you want to add to that quickly?
Yes, I think I just want to add one other thing, and that is that for some consumers, if they are retrenched, if they lose their jobs, that in most of these credit agreements that they enter into in this country, they also take out insurance for retrenchment. But, you know, there's some requirements. One of them is that you must get a proper letter of retrenchment, and then you must hand it into the credit provider. And that will give you some relief. I mean, not all your debts are immediately settled. Some, you know, the retrenchment cover is for like 6 months. So it will pay your installment for the next 6 months. So you're not falling into arrears for a period at least. But, you know, and a lot of people, they take out this retrenchment cover, they pay for it every month, but then when they do get retrenched, they don't know how to claim, or they forgot about it. But so every person out there, if they have lost their jobs and if they have credit agreements and credit problems, they must go back and just check if they didn't have retrenchment cover. And going forward, that's a very important thing that consumers who lose their jobs must remember.
All right, thank you for that. Let's look at some of the Facebook messages in Isibhalele zona. Usiyabulela Stofile says, Sis Alicia, so wish about gogo nomkhulu bayeke ukuboleka imali kobashonisa kuba iyabacindezela kakhulu lento. It's better if they borrow money from the bank. Usestex Sprite uzandile othandwa qasa athi msasazi mna dinengxaki umama wami wasweleka ebhatale imali yamagqwetha ngoku le mali ibhatalwa ndim ngoba baye bafuna ukundithibela xa ndingababhatali. All right, so they wanted to have him served with summons when he wasn't paying. Yenze kanjani lonto ndibhatele sekugqiba ingendim onetyala. All right, unathi G Hotbom says baza kunyeza njani lento yale control ngoba abantu basoloke bengena ezingxakini. That's exactly what we want to find out when aputispa ukuthi this tough love approach ayizuhambisa na abantu ukuthi babuyele to the very same thing that we're saying nifuna ukuregulator o mashonisa laba bangaregistiwe.
Indlela esibeke ngayo kuma regulations kulomthetho sandobeka ukuthi uma uyafuna imali ikhona lento bayibiza i-understating of your financial flexibility. I think sibeke kahle kuma regulations ukuthi manje akusilona iqanduva le bank kuphela ukuthi whether or not you afford.
But ubano check lento that's what we want to know. If umuntu ezo apply a bank afika athi nansi form ngizobhala 400 rand, who's going to follow up on the fact that this person really earns 400 rand?
It nginikeze maybe a short background. Ama affordability assessment or the affordability assessment criteria before the act came into being were not standardized.
Okay.
So ile credit provider noma banks or amashonisa bebe nama forms wabo nje abawenzayo.
Okay.
Where you are not even in a position to pick up if somebody really is
so they each had like a specialized affordability assessment criteria.
So now that I see. Now that the act is in operation, we have actually standardized the affordability assessment. And it's no longer guidelines, it's regulations. It used to be guidelines so where anyone was not actually forced to comply. But now that it's regulations, there are actually enforcement actions that will be taken for non-compliance. Noguti, our credit providers were giving loans recklessly, of which before, National Credit Regulator and the National Consumer Tribunal, they did not have a mandate to investigate and prosecute on those cases. But in terms of this new amendment, if uhambile wire a credit provider and you understate your liabilities, a bank can raise a defense, no, you did not. So it's no longer a responsibility of the credit provider. Now when I'm paying a consumer, you must be honest, like Henny was saying, you must completely disclose your actually financial responsibility.
Let's go back to Henny. Henny, look, how will this, the new regulations actually impact the lenders? Are they in support of this initiative?
Alicia, I think there's a lot of myths we have to deal with that will impact. And the important element that's missing here is that we should have assessed the impact prior to implementation. Having said that, every credit provider who is a responsible business person, because that is what my members are, we are business person. We do not go into a transaction with the view of losing money. We go into the transaction so that we can make a profit and continue to do business with a particular client.
Okay, Henny, leave it there for now. We have to unfortunately take another final break, and Mbogeli will be back shortly after this. Stay tuned. Welcome back, Mbogeli. Siyaqhubeka nengxoxo yethu ngemithetho emisha phela yenzela ukuvukela wena uma kungasafanele neze uthathe isikweletu phuthuma phela usithinte. Some Facebook messages very quickly. Unel Zanelli says reckless lending is the core problem here in South Africa, and it is done by those who don't understand it, and this leads them into credit debt. That's Uneli Creel. Thank you so much for that. George Motswakwa says, I'm happy about that. Hopefully our parents will be helped ngalendlela e-right. Tembele Poswa has one thing. He says arrest them. Henny, what do you say to that? Should they just really arrest people that are reckless lenders? What are your views on this?
The rule of law in this country is you're not guilty until you've been proven to be guilty. We have seen some rogue behavior in some cases with some regulators. That doesn't solve the problem. Key part of all of this is that we are partners in this. Consumers, regulators, credit providers, alternative dispute resolution officers, and educators are all part of the solution. And to make an assumption that a loan is reckless, or to make an assumption that the borrower was reckless, like the one person just said, is not necessarily so. Credit, at the end of the day, is part of the economy. It's part of what turns the wheels of the economy. And there's certainly good credit and there's bad credit. And certainly we want to see bad credit eradicated.
Thank you so much, Henny. If you'll go into explaining right now what the amendments are, Rihanna. But on Twitter here, Kiba says consumers also rely on credit providers for help in terms of affordability. Affordability access to abantu basekasi is very poor. Toby Lemotsumi says, what if I don't get a job after 6 months? Can the insurance settle the amount I owe to the creditors? Who wants to answer that very quickly, Peter? Before Uriana's Chelama amendments.
Yes. Normally, when you go and ask for credit, there's what we call credit life insurance.
Yes.
Which is actually aggregated to the lifespan of the loan. Okay. So what you do, a credit provider would actually ask you if you want to take credit life insurance, of which in the event of you being disabled, if you get retrenched, then the credit life then will be able to cover that particular credit.
All right, siyabonga. Asithatha uMamncula la, our final caller on the line. Mamncula, siyakwamukela ohlelweni phuthuma ma usibuza umbuzo wakho.
Mama wakhe ndinengxaki apha yomntana wam umzukulwana wam owe wafunda University of Western Cape.
Yebo ma.
Ngoku kwacaba lo muntu bembhatalela akakwazi ukukhona ukumbhatalela straight. Bangakuba ndathi take over ndamenzela ngokwami ezileta zami zenkamnkam uba makabhatale. Waze ke ngoku la elatyala lase-University eKapa liyamvalela emsebenzini akakwazi uthola umsebenzi.
Okay ma. So ufuna ukwazi ukuthi singamenzelani. All right, basically she's got a child in university, or she was in university. She couldn't afford the school fees, so somebody was paying on their behalf, and now this person stopped paying, and she's gone on to find a job. Now she can't even find work actually because of the credit listing from the school.
Yeah, you see, it depends on what type of loan they took out. If they took out a student loan where there was a sponsor, they call this other person sometimes a sponsor,
yes.
Then both the sponsor and the student remain liable. And, you know, if those two people don't pay, they will both be listed for non-payment of the loan because they signed a valid contract and they took the money, and probably the money was paid over to the university. But I mean, if that blacklisting is now preventing her from getting a job, she must maybe just report it to our office if she gets the number, because it depends on what type of job she's applying for. You know, a listing should only be held against you if you are applying for a job in finances and with money. If you have a clerical job that you apply for, they cannot hold that against you. It's against the law.
All right.
But they don't all know that. So, you know, she must please report that and see maybe we can help her.
Where can she report, Suren?
She must come to our office. So let's see what is the type of listing on her name and what job she's applying for.
All right.
We can maybe help.
All right. Now, where can people find information on the new amendments? Very quickly.
Okay, quickly. I think I must say that the amendment, since they have been published on the 13th, we're still in a process of embarking on road shows.
Okay.
Together with the NCR. And also education and awareness, because what actually hits people is that they are not aware of where they should go and what they should do. And even in respect of this particular case, I mean, we have changed the regulations to say if you're looking for an employment, how do they expect to pay your fees or your installment if the very same credit provider is saying I cannot employ you, or somebody else is saying I cannot employ you because you are blacklisted, you know, because if you are actually blacklisted, it means you have an impaired record.
Okay.
Yeah. So, but what we are suggesting is that people, whenever they apply for a job, and we have even advised credit bureaus to say you don't actually disclose a consumer's information if it's in relation to the application for a job, more especially if it's not a job that relates to finance or handling finances.
All right. Well, unfortunately, we have so run out of time. Bugeli, seliphindela fika phela lelo thuba lethu lokuthi sivalelise. Let me thank my studio guests for making the time to be here on the show. Giphinde futhi ngibonge nani phela babukeli ngokuba nathi kuze kube manje. Please do join us again next week Friday for another live consumer topic, rights topic. You can also send us your consumer topic suggestions to consumer@sabc.co.za. From me, Alish Ntombi Agajali, and the whole team, as well as my guests, Nisali Gatle. Till next time.